welcome to Handed Down, where we celebrate traditional songs and the people who sing them. Today's guest is a recently retired linguistics lecturer and an active folk musician. He's combined these interests with his scholarly work, co-authoring a recent book about the sociolinguistics of folk performance and a number of papers in scholarly journals. He's also a storyteller, a songwriter and a playwright, and he teaches poetry writing and creativity. And rather bravely, I think, did a TED Talk on creativity for academics. Franz Andres Morrissey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for giving me such a wonderful introduction.
Well, you're very welcome, and you made it really easy by having lots of interesting things on the internet. Where are you joining us from today?
I live in a tiny little village about 15 kilometres outside Bern in the Swiss countryside, fairly close to the language border with the French-speaking part. So if you travel another 10 kilometres from here, you're actually surrounded by people who speak only or almost only French. They might have learned German at school, but they don't really particularly like speaking it. One of the few places where you have absolutely lousy mobile reception. That tells you a little bit about about what the place is like. And one of the lovely things about it is that it's fairly isolated. So playing music in the middle of the night is not going to disturb anyone.
That sounds idyllic. So shall we start by talking about today's song? It's the ballad Broun Edom. It's a big old ballad, and it has a number of really interesting features that we were talking about just before the recording. Can you tell us about that?
It has these sort of different speeds of narrative. Francis Gumer, who was a student of Child's, described this as leaping and lingering. Leaping would be the story that sort of happens very quickly. And then you have these rather detailed elements which he describes as lingering with dialogue between the characters. And you have that, of course, in Broun Edom, because there is that part where his love meets up with this false knight, and the false knight sort of first tries to seduce her and then threatens her. And this happens in this particularly typical style of the ballad narrative, which is essentially dramatic. He has at least two lines of verse or the whole verse, his part of what he says to her, and then her response to him. It's very rarely one line, it's usually two and very often four lines. And that whole thing works with repetition. So, you repeat essentially exactly the same thing, and it leads to a kind of climax. Again, Gumer calls this incremental repetition. The repetition is the same, but it leads to the crunch. And the crunch in Broun Edom, of course, is that rather than sort of trying to buy her, he threatens to kill her. And that's when, again, rather laconically, at the end, this false knight is punished for what he does. What is also interesting is that in some ways it's untypical, because the opening two stanzas are spoken, I would imagine, from the point of view of the lady who describes how beautiful he is. And normally descriptive passages like that don't happen in folk literature, because folk literature works so strongly with stereotypes or with archetypes, perhaps a bit less negatively put. And that those opening two lines where she praises his beauty and how much he means to her, that is relatively unusual. And then it becomes quite normal in the sense that it just says, well, he's banished. It's never really explicitly stated what he's banished for. He's a blacksmith and she's a lady. Probably that's the reason why he was banished. He transcended or tried to transcend class boundaries or something.
There's so much in this song, isn't there? But I really like what you say about the repetition. That really stood out to me. It reminded me of, it felt like reading a fairy tale.
Yeah, but I mean, this whole repetition thing, if you think of the fairy tale Mr. Fox, has exactly that. And it's also this, it also has this idea of incremental repetition, because it leads up to, the moment when all is revealed.
Well, I guess there's some wonderful, I guess you would call them folklore motifs, wouldn't you? There's a false night. There's shooting a lot of birds. Now, I did wonder if there was maybe a euphemism in there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the bower in the greenwood, how often do we come across a bower in a greenwood in real life, and how frequently do they crop up in balladry, So.
Ballads have got all the best places, haven't they?
Oh, yeah.
And I also really like the fact that the false night, he gets thwarted. She wasn't having any of it.
When you think about, what I said about the laconic style, the ending, which essentially renders this knight incapable of fighting. Because if you lose 3 fingers from your right hand, there is no way you can hold a sword, or you can hold a bow and arrow. You are incapacitated as far as fighting is concerned. It made him leave a better pledge 3 fingers from his right hand. That's all that, that's the battle.
May the sunshine warm your back, may a soft breeze dry your tears, may the moon's silver light banish your dark dreams and fears, may the path rise to your footsteps as you travel through the land, and may God hold you forever in the palm of her hand.
Broun Edom is one of the songs in the Child Ballad collection. It is a one-off, not just in terms of the story it tells, but also in terms of the music. Now, perhaps that I need to sort of give a little bit of background about the music. I was at a song workshop, a ballad workshop in Stones Barn in Cumbria with Martin Carthy, Rick Kemp and Maddie Pryor in 2014. And I was trying to find out what the tunes were to some of those traditional ballads, because, of course, Child did not provide any tunes. And I found that there was a book by an American musicologist called Bertram Harris Bronson. He collected as many tunes as he could for all those 300 plus songs that are in the Child collection. And I found that Broun Edom had just the one tune. It's rather unusual in terms of the fact that there's only one text, to my knowledge, and there's only one tune. And it was supplied by Anna Gordon, or Anna Gordon Brown, or Mrs. Brown of Falkland, as she's popularly known, who was one of the greatest contributors to a whole range of collections of folk ballads. And I sort of got interested in Anna Gordon Brown, and that sort of ballooned.
Yes, Anna Gordon Brown. I've only just scratched the surface, really, but she seems to have been, quite a character for a start, but she seems to have played quite a major role as well in bringing together just a whole bunch of songs that no one else had.
She was born and grew up in Aberdeen. Her father was Thomas Gordon, a professor of humanities at King's College in Aberdeen, and he was also a member of the Aberdeen Musical Society. Although Anna Gordon was definitely incredibly musically gifted, because she was a woman, she couldn't get membership of the Aberdeen Musical Society, and she was also very smart, but she couldn't study. And she eventually married Reverend Brown and travelled, or rather relocated, from Aberdeen to Falkland. And over that period, she changed from Aberdonian English, or Aberdonian Scots rather, to a more, I wouldn't say it was Fife Scots, but it was a more sort of levelled Scots, and you can hear that, or you can see that in the later ballads that were recorded of hers. And so from that point of view, she's quite interesting, but also because she contributed something like 30 ballads to the Child collection. which basically makes up for about, 10% of the stuff that's in there. And she learnt all these from her mother, from her aunt Lilias, and typically for the time, from a scullery maid or a nursemaid, who remains nameless. But she learnt all these before she was 12, and she had this phenomenal memory for ballads and songs, and she kept them alive until she died, which was in 1810. Just a really interesting character. And given the fact that Child was really interested in traditional material, and always sort of split things up into A, B, C, and up to E type materials for each one of the ballads, she contributed a very, very large number of the A ballads. I don't think all 30 are A ballads, but the A ballads were, in Child's view, were the most authentic and the most beautiful and the most worthy of curation, shall we say.
And I suppose in a way she was a collector in her own right, even as a child, and then just kept them in her memory.
That's right, and she was sort of contacted by a whole number of people who were into this sort of thing, contributed to the collections of Hurd, of Jameson, of Scott, Walter Scott, Kinloch, Motherwell, Buchan. She was a really, really important source for balladry in general. To the point, because, Child never actually put together a poetics of the ballad. He just collected them and ordered them in the way in which he thought that the most noteworthy stuff came first, and the least noteworthy stuff has high numbers because they were broadside ballads and they were rubbish as far as he was concerned. The ones that he didn't put in, the ones that he did put in, the broadsides, he felt had some merit. But one can generally say that the lower the child ballad number, the higher it was in his esteem. In that sense, he, by adopting so many of her ballads, he kind of created, by implication, a poetics of the ballad, which was very, very strongly influenced by 18th century ballad tradition in Scotland. So I think to a large degree what we nowadays sort of see as classics amongst the ballads is essentially very, very largely 18th century material, and very largely actually influenced by the singing of Anna Gordon Brown. One of the things that one needs to be aware of is that all these songs travelled. Something that she might have picked up could have originally come from England. And of course it went the other way around as well. If you look at all the various versions of Geordie, for instance, or Georgie, all the way to Joan Baez, you realise how these songs have travelled. In the case of Cecil Sharp and Maud Carpeles and those kind of people, who then actually went and tried to find ballads or songs like that in the American Appalachians. So, that kind of journey that went from, in many cases, from Scotland to Northern Ireland, from Northern Ireland to the US, sort of shows that these ballads are actually really travelling material in many ways.
Yes, and we've already looked on the show at a couple of ballads that did just that. So Barbara Allen and Pretty Sarah, both of which crossed over the Atlantic very successfully.
It's funny you should mention Barbara Allen, because most of the versions that we have of Barbara Allen are the ones that were sung by Joan Baez and I think Jean Ritchie, and it's all the same tune. But if you look at the Bronson collection, he collected something like 148 different tunes for Barbara Allen. It was such a treasure of a book to find. And he starts out, and that's a sort of like a hidden kick, I think, against Francis James Child. There are 4 volumes, and the first volume starts with the foreword with, "When is a ballad not a ballad? When it doesn't have a tune."
But does it have to have its own tune, or can it borrow one from somewhere else? Because there was quite a lot of tune swapping going on, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was always wondering where Martin Carthy got all his tunes from, and he said at one stage that he actually goes to Scotland to pipe, shops that have pipe music, and checks out the pipe tunes and then uses them as tunes for some of the ballads that he likes to do. If you look at Biker Hill and Elsie Marley, you find that both of these songs actually swap whole verses. And because, of course, the meter is actually fairly predictable with folk songs. It tends to be sort of 4 stressed syllables in the odd lines and 3 stressed syllables in the even lines. A transfer from one tune to another is a piece of cake.
Yeah, and I know that everyone now is doing exactly what I'm doing, which is going through every tune that they know in their head and seeing if it fits that pattern.
It's actually interesting that because the pattern is fairly predictable, and if you look at Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, that it follows exactly that pattern. But Walter Scott, who was very intent on the literary qualities of the ballad, he like Child, he didn't care about the music. He felt that if he came across a ballad that didn't fit that pattern, he would rewrite it. And I think it was Clark Saunders that he picked, which in fact didn't follow that pattern. It had 4 stressed syllables in all the lines, and he changed it to 4-3-4-3, and the result was that the tune that it came with was no longer singable.
So he broke the ballad, essentially.
Essentially, yeah, because he was so obsessed with this 4-3-4-3 thing.
As I roved out one evening down by the assembly mob, I heard 2 lovers talking as me and my love passed on, and the words that passed between them, they were so very few. It's not leaving Limerick that grieves me, but my darling, leaving you.
The book, Language, the Singer and the Song, refers to roughly, I think, about 150 songs in all. And in order for people who would like to read it to have an idea what these songs are like, what we ended up doing, Dick Watts and I, was to sort of try and find on YouTube or anywhere else on the internet links to the songs. And there were a whole number of songs that we didn't find, and Broun Edom was one of them. So we actually ended up recording a certain number of them for the companion website. I think Dick sort of said he didn't really know what to do with that particular song. So I thought, I'll give it a go. And it sort of ballooned because it's quite a long song. And in order for it to become accessible to a 20th or 21st century audience, I sort of took a leaf out of Steel Ice Band's book when they did King Henry, which is quite a long ballad as well. But what they did was they sort of split it up into various bits with different types of instrumentation to sort of make kind of like a mini opera out of it. And I thought, yeah, that could work. And so I split the song up into various parts that seemed to have some kind of a cohesion and arranged the music accordingly. And it sort of ballooned. It took me about 3 days to record it. And my poor wife, Caroline, she was in the study next to mine. She listened to me doing this song for 3 days, and she point blank has refused so far to listen to the final mix. So She's never actually heard what it turned out to be.
Oh no, poor Caroline. It just makes me realise, though, what a fantastic bargain your book is, because you get access to all those songs as well. So we'll definitely be putting a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. It's the original hardback was ludicrously expensive at £95, but the paperback is much more reasonably priced.
Can I ask you about your journey into folk music? So I always like to ask guests this question, but where did it all start for you? When did you first start to get interested in folk music?
I think it started because as a very young teenager, sort of about 13, I'd always, even as a kid, had been interested in music, because we didn't have a telly. And so I listened to the radio quite a bit. And I think when I was 8 or 9, my grandmother sort of asked what I wanted for my birthday. So I asked her for a Beatle record. And she went to, I mean, this is Switzerland, right? She went to the record shop in her small provincial town, and they thought Beatle is just people with long hair. And so she came away with a Hollies record, Stop, Stop, Stop. I was in primary school, but I was totally besotted with music. And so eventually my mum said, would you like to learn to play the guitar? And I said, yeah. So I did. And when I was a young teenager, I realized that I was no Ritchie Blackmore, because everybody was into Deep Purple at the time. And so I sold the electric guitar that I had just bought for, with months and months of saved up money, and bought an acoustic. And that was largely because I heard an album by Donovan, and I thought, this is great. I love acoustic guitar. That sounds really lovely. And then a friend of mine sort of got me hooked on the Dubliners, and from the Dubliners I went on to Planxty and Irish music. There's always been a great interest in Irish music in Switzerland. And then I sort of got into English music, English and Scottish music. And there's something wonderfully timeless about it all. And that's what I love about it, I think. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that Donovan was your gateway drug into folk music, as it were.
It has to be said that it was before he went psychedelic. Yeah. It was, things like Catch the Wind and Colours and Universal Soldier and Josie, and all the sort of stuff where they called him the British Bob Dylan, and he said, no, I'm the Scottish Woody Guthrie. And I thought, I didn't know that at the time, but I think that's a wonderful way of deflecting that. Oh, you're just the British Bob Dylan.
And you're in a band as well, aren't you, called Taradiddle?
That's right. Yeah. That started about 5 years ago, together with a married couple, Stephen Ferran, who used to be a country and Americana musician. He was also a session musician in Nashville. And he first came to Germany with a band and then moved to Switzerland, where he met his wife, Mo. And between the three of us, we're taradiddling. The sort of main focus is 3-part harmonies. And for me, it's a dream come true, because I love the sound of the human voice, and with those two, it's just a sheer pleasure.
Martin said to his man, "Fie, man, fie." Martin said to his man, "Who's the fool now?" Martin said to his man, "Fill thou the cup and I the can. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the fool now?"
I think you've got an album coming out soon, is that right?
Yeah. That was really exciting. We recorded it at Red Kite Studio in central Wales, near Llandovery. And we had some of the most amazing musicians on there. Jessie May from Steel Eye Span, Tim Harris, and James McIntosh from the Transatlantic Sessions. I mean, it was just, I sort of sat along these people and thinking, but it's only me. You know? But it sounds like a really lovely album, and we assume that it's going to come out at the beginning of the autumn.
That's wonderful. And where can people get that from?
Do you know, at the moment, we're still debating whether we're going to put it out. Red Kite apparently have their own label, so that would be great. But we're also somehow wondering whether we should try and find a label here in Switzerland, or to sell it, ourselves.
I'm really curious to know what the folk scene is like in Switzerland.
Oof. That's an interesting question. There's a lot of singer-songwriter stuff happening. Relatively little traditional. From about 69 to about 74, there was a fairly lively Swiss folk scene. In fact, Dick Watts, who is the main author of the Language, the Singer and the Song, he was one of the figureheads of the Swiss folk scene. He came from Britain, and even in those days sort of felt that perhaps there was more of a future outside the UK for him. And he started the folk club in Zurich, and then a number of other folk clubs came along, and they all sort of folded round about 75. And I think one of the reasons why they folded was because they started adopting, not explicitly, but kind of started adopting the McCall policy that, you know, you could only creditably do folk songs in your own tradition. Unlike Britain, which, you know, has a whole library of music, there are something like, I would say, about 5 or 6 collections in the Swiss canon that are of any interest. And what effectively happened was that everybody played the same 25 to 30 songs, because those were the only ones that sort of seemed to be interesting and had some kind of social or social critical content. So the folk scene basically disappeared up its own backside because it got so incredibly boring. And then you had punk come in, and they basically preempted, they took over the amateurish musicianship on the one hand, and the social comment on the other, except that they made it much more immediate and much more relevant for the kids of the day. And I think that sort of killed it. But there are still folkies around. They tend to be ancient people like myself, or young singer-songwriters. So a lot of acoustic music, that's happening. I'm always sort of slightly dismayed when I listen to Brits sort of complaining about how their folk scene has deteriorated. You've still got one. You've got festivals, you've got clubs, you've got singers' nights, all that kind of stuff. That died in the mid-70s, actually.
Yeah, it is pretty lively in the UK at the moment. I mean, I remember the 80s when you couldn't find folk music here nor there. It was just deeply uncool. Of course, there was no internet then, so perhaps we just didn't know what was going on. But tell me a bit more about this very small body of Swiss folk music. Is that still sung, or has it died away?
I think it has, to a large degree, died away. I came across an album recently which had been done by a fairly experimental musician, and that was very daring. 1 or 2 songs have made it into the pop repertoire of some Swiss bands, because they were done by one of the Swiss pop greats, a man called Polo Hofer. He recorded this with a number of different people, this song, and it's a brilliant song. It's really beautiful, and that's probably the only one that's still around. And a lot of people don't actually realise that it is a traditional. There are some interesting songs. What I think is interesting about Switzerland, though, is, of course, it's a multilingual country. You have a French Swiss tradition, you have an Italian Swiss tradition, and that's quite lively, actually. And you have, of course, the German-speaking Swiss tradition, and you have the Romansh tradition, and that is also surprisingly lively, given the fact that there are only about 60,000 Romansh speakers left. You know, it's a bit like Gaelic, and but I think when a language reaches that kind of critical size, what you can hang on to it in terms of folklore, in terms of tradition, in terms of what is or used to be part of the folk culture, then a special effort is made to retain that.
At what point in your academic career did your love of folk music come together with your research interests? Is that something that was there from the start, or is it something that you just kind of picked up along the way?
No, it was ridiculously late. It was almost a last effort because I was employed primarily as a teacher, not necessarily as a researcher. And Dick Watts was my boss. We met in the heady days of the Swiss folk scene during the big festival on Lenzburg, with a castle, beautiful setting for music. And he never let me forget that I sort of walked up to him, starry-eyed and said, "Are you Dick Watts?" But we ended up playing music together for many, many years. And he kept on sort of going on, "Come on, let's write this book," and blah, blah, blah. And I really didn't fancy it. Even though I taught academic writing, I hated all this kind of rubbish of having to have a bibliography and everything that you say has to be referenced and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And then once I got into it, I suddenly thought, hey, this is sexy. I could really sort of lose myself in that. And it was kind of very late in the day. I suppose if I had done it earlier, perhaps I could have made a name for myself at some stage. But then on the other hand, who cares? Essentially, what is fun about music is singing, is doing it together, is to, bond communities. And I mean, that's one of the quintessences of the book. It's about making communities happen. But for that, you don't necessarily need to have a Cambridge University Press stamp of approval. I mean, I still have very, very fond memories of the song that you and I did together, but the two songs that you and I did together without actually having ever met in person.
Thus every kind their pleasure find, the savage and the tender. Some social join and leagues combine, some solitary wander. Thorns away the cruel sway, tyrannic man's dominion, the sportsman's joy, the murdering cry, the fluttering gory pinion.
For me, the pandemic was absolutely fascinating. How the Barnstoners and how these collaborations happened with people who were physically hundreds of miles apart, and the sense of community through the music and through sharing songs with each other. That was just absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, it was. And it was quite a lifeline for me, actually, quite life-changing in the sense that I probably would have never started recording again without that, and definitely wouldn't have started this podcast. So I think it was a difficult time, but some amazing things came out of it because of that community. So we were going to talk about your play as well, because you're just about to be in a play called Journeys of Slavery, and you're doing the music for it. Do you want to tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, this came out of a project that I did with the choir of University of Bern, and they had decided they were going to do some music that was Shakespeare related, which included things like Verdi's Macbeth, as well as Bernstein's West Side Story. And somebody had the glorious idea that perhaps the drama workshop that I ran at university, besides the creative writing workshop, would perhaps be a group that could do that. And so we ended up having this combination of snippets from Shakespeare plays linked to the songs that the choir was doing. they were doing something about slavery in Brazil. And we sort of started talking about what one could do. And I mentioned that there were a few American songs that were quite interesting. And so we ended up putting this thing together, which is essentially a program of music from the States, from Africa, and from Brazil. And we thought that the formula had really worked well, where you had text combined with and relevant to the songs. And so that's what this turned out to be is called Journeys of Slavery. There's a former student of mine who is Ghanaian Swiss, and she's reading the things that are relevant for people of colour. And I'm the baddie. I basically read the white man's bit. We're sort of bringing in also a number of songs of our own. Mansa is doing Strange Fruit, the Abel Meeropol song, made famous by Nina Simone and earlier by Billie Holiday. And I'm doing part of a broadside ballad called The Flying Cloud, which describes a slaving voyage in actually surprisingly sympathetic tone from the point of view of this sailor watching what was happening on this slaving ship, which is combined with an excerpt from an autobiography of a man called Bakwakwa, who describes his view of the slaving ship from the point of view of one of the people who is incarcerated in the hold. And then we have Robert Burns' The Slave's Lament, which is a really interesting piece of music, given the fact that he was a Scot, an 18th century Scot, white man, had never really left Scotland. He was negotiating a position on a plantation in the Caribbean, but never actually took it. But then, sort of, writing from the perspective, the Slave's Lament, writing from the perspective of somebody who's captured in Senegal and transferred to Virginia. It's a really moving piece of music.
Well, of course, it is really important for anyone writing a song to be able to put themselves into the shoes of another person, see the world through someone else's eyes. But it does strike me that there is a bit of a cognitive dissonance going on if you are writing a song about being a slave and being sympathetic to that point of view, and then wanting to go and work on a plantation. It seems a bit odd to me.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. I mean, he spent most of his time sort of, chasing a few bob. And I think that sort of was probably economically motivated.
Well, of course, it wasn't just a few bob he was chasing, as it was also a lot of ladies as well.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, that was an interesting debate that I had with some people, and I must admit, I'm very uncomfortable about it in many ways, because so many of his relationships, of course, were with servant girls. So there was that disparity, that there was this power differential between man and women at the time anyway, but actually man and servant girl on the other. And I can see where some of the Scottish women poets come from when they say, well, this has Weinsteinian overtones. But on the other hand, I also feel that he seemed to have a genuine affection for women, and he was patriarchal, of course, but his poem "The Rights of Women" is actually really, supportive of that women must be protected and women must be looked after. And okay, that's the patriarchal bit, but it wasn't a question of women are second-hand citizens or anything like that. And of course, he was also so incredibly instrumental in collecting Scottish folk songs. Yeah. Hey Cathru, for instance, is It's unclear whether he wrote it or he collected it from from fishing folk in Fife. He was so incredibly good at imitating the folky idiom that it is essentially impossible to tell in the ballads that he collected where he amended bits that didn't work. So, yeah, he was an immensely impressive and very, very interesting character. Flawed, I agree, but also capable of writing unbelievably beautiful love poetry.
Up with the calls a dies out, and the lads up a cavin', and the kimmers a largo, and the lasses a leavin'. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo. We hae tales to tell, and we hae songs to sing, and we hae pennies to spend, and we hae pints to bring. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo. We'll live all our days, and them that comes behind, let them do the like and spend the gear they win. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo. Hey, ca-through, for we, hey, muckle-a-doo.
So at this point, I'd like to say we do have listeners from all over the world to this podcast. And at this point, I really do want to say hello to everyone who listens. I can't tell you just how much I appreciate it. Do drop me a little line on Twitter or Facebook just to tell me where you're listening from. Because I know we have people from 6 continents, and I think that's absolutely amazing. Let me know what you like about the show or what you would like to see instead. But just mainly, thank you so much for your support. But what that also means, Franz, is that there are going to be people near to where you're based who might want to come and see one of your shows. So whereabouts can they find you?
Well, at the moment, it's mainly around bigger Swiss towns. But we do hope that when the album comes out that we might sort of, travel a little bit further abroad. We would like to, do some shows in Germany, possibly in France, because that's not very far away. Austria is also a possibility, Italy. But at the moment, it's mainly the Bernese area. Yeah. So, but as I said, that's really at the moment.
And if people want to book you, they can get in touch?
Absolutely, yeah. We do have a website, which at the moment is a little bit bare because we're still, we had a couple of gigs over the last 2 years, largely because, as for everybody, live music sort of disappeared. So our website is relatively new. But it would actually contain information about the album once it comes out, and it would obviously also have contact details and tour dates, and tell people a little bit about Stephen Farron, Mo Brandley, and myself. And the address is taradiddle.ch.
That's great. Thank you, Franz. And we will put that in the show notes as we usually do. Well, we're coming to the end of the show now. Thank you so much, Franz, for being a guest today. And thank you to you all for listening. Do subscribe to us on Apple or Google or anywhere that you get your podcasts from, and then you'll never miss an episode. We'll be back soon with more stories and songs. But in the meantime, here is Franz Andres Morrissey to play us out with Broun Edom.
Oh, who would wish the wind to blow and the leaves to fall their way? And who would wish a better love than Broun Edom the smith? His hammer is of the beaten gold, his studies of the steel, his fingers white are my delight, he blows his bellows well. But they banished him, Broun Edom, from father and from mother. They banished him, Broun Edom, from sister and from brother. Oh, they have banished him, Broun Edom, from the flower of all his kin. But he's built a bower in good green wood between his lady and him. As it fell out upon a day, Broun Edom, he thought long that he would to the greenwood go to hunt some venison. His ta'en, his bow all o'er his arm, his sword onto his hand, and he is to the greenwood gone as fast as he could gang. Then he's shot up and he's shot down a bird upon the briar, and he sent it home to his lady, bade her be of good cheer. Then he's shot up and he's shot down a bird upon the thorn, and he sent it home to his lady, that he'd be home the morn. When he came to his lady's bower, he stood a little forby, and there he heard a full false knight attempting his lady gay. Is taken out a gay gold ring, had cost him many a pound. Oh, grant me love for love, lady, and this shall be your own. I love Broun Edom, well, she says, I know that he does me. I would not give Broun Edom's love for no false knight I see. He's taken out a purse of gold, was full right to the string. Grant me love for love, lady, and this shall be all thine. I love Broun Edom, well, she says, and I know that he does me, and I would not be your lightly man for more than you'd give me. Then he has drawn his long, long sword, and he's flashed it to and fro. Now grant me love for love, lady, or through you this shall go. Sighing said the lady gay, Broun Edom tarries long, and up then starts her Broun Edom, says, I am just at your hand. made him leave his brand. He's made him leave a better pledge, 4 fingers from his right hand.